My name is Denise Hodgins, and I am the Deputy Director of the Early Childhood Pedagogy Network.
I'm Veronica Pacini-Ketchabaw, and I'm a professor of early childhood education at Western University. BC Early Learning Framework emerges from a very long debate in early childhood education around the construction of what is childhood, who is an early childhood educator, or what the role of an early childhood educator is, what are the different knowledges, bodies of literature that we think with about early childhood education. BC Early Learning Framework doesn't specifically tell us a truth about the world or early childhood education, but rather it creates a particular early childhood education world that is offered to the field and is offered to families in the province. We need to think the early learning framework's history within the social, political, financial, cultural discussions of the times. We cannot read it without thinking about what was happening at the time in which the early learning framework emerged. What were the discussions that were taking place in early childhood education? What were the discussions, the questions, the challenges that the early learning framework came in to answer or to respond to? I talked about the early learning framework emerging from a very long debate in the literature about early childhood education. This debate emerges not necessarily in Canada, but it emerges as a global debate, is a global discussion around early childhood education that challenges the normative understanding of the child as a developing human being. These conversations began to take place in 2005, 2006 within the early childhood education community, including the policymaking community.
Around 2005, 2006, there was a lot of conversation happening in British Columbia that met this desire to create a document that would help guide early childhood education here.
As new students in early childhood education, I encourage you to read the early learning framework in British Columbia in relationship to the work that Gunilla Dahlberg has done in Sweden and Peter Moss in England. Challenge yourself to read the text beyond quality that happens before the framework in early childhood education, and a text that the framework is inspired on. You also want to carefully attend to the history of the Te Whāriki in New Zealand, as the early learning framework was inspired by the Te Whāriki in New Zealand, particularly in the discussions that Helen May and Margaret Carr engaging with the field and with Indigenous communities in their local contexts.
When we take that approach, when we even look at the revised version that came out in 2017, so 10 years between the first iteration, and you can see some very different choices in the current version because it was responding to particular conditions. And again, another 10 years, we might realize we need new questions as well. The vision that's written in the early learning framework is a very broad, hopeful, aspirational vision of respectfully living and learning together. When you meet the document and really read deeply the pages that unpack what's being offered as part of that vision. I think you see a vision and a hope for a well-educated, well-informed early childhood educator that responds to the conditions and I'll say needs of the particularities of the children, families, communities, and times in which we live. A vision that recognizes that educator, in order to do that deep, careful, situated 21st century work, needs more than child development as the only language and tool. There's a lot put into those early pages of the framework that really show the complexity of what it is to be an early childhood educator in creating particular worlds, particular subjectivities. There's a hopefulness of creating subjectivities and worlds beyond only a Euro-Western white subject. There's a purposefulness in the document to try to include and name that there are other ways of knowing and being, and that through millennia, there have been ways of raising children. What we assume to be the way to do early childhood education is only 150 years old in a very particular context. So I think there are gestures in this version of the framework that is trying to open up ways of understanding and living the work that can be embedded and situated in the particularities of context.